This is a project that will completely transform your entryway or your mudroom and get it organized. So I was given a photo and said, can you make this? Now this is going to be for an entryway organization area, and this is also perfect for a mudroom environment. Now the one difference that I'm going to do, this photo is actually showing where there are area for 3 bins. I'm going to make it where it will contain 4 bins, so there's 4 people that are going to be using this. This project has a shelf at the top, and it also has a bench at the bottom where you can sit and put on your shoes and gather your items. If you like content such as this, I would appreciate you giving me a thumbs up and subscribe right down there below. It really does help out the channel. Another thing that the algorithms look for on YouTube is that if people will watch the video all the way through. It's only a very short video, and I would hope that you would leave a comment as to what type of projects that you would like to see in the future. I'm going to begin this project by building the bench itself along with the shelf on the top. Now the bench is actually going to be laminated 2x4s. Now this project is going to be 80 inches long, and the width of this bench is going to be 17 3/4 of an inch. Of course, the first thing that I need to do is cut all of these to length. I'm actually cutting these at 82 inches, and yes, the final length is going to be 80 inches. I want it just a little bit long, and that way after the glue up, I can cut it to the actual 80 inches. You'll notice on the edge of the 2x4, you have this little rounded corners. Now this little radius needs to get cut away because that would not look good if I tried to laminate it together and I had that radius there. So I'm going to take all of these over to the table saw, and I'll be removing roughly about 1/8 of an inch to be able to get rid of that little round over. I want to verify the width of these 2x4s. The actual 2x4 should be 3.5 inches, not the actual 4 inches. However, I've also found that some of the 2x4s are actually a little bit smaller than a 3.5 inches. I'm putting a pencil line all along the edge. In fact, I'm putting a pencil line on all of the sides of the 2x4. Even though the table saw does a really good job on cutting a nice straight line, it's still not good enough to be able to laminate it together. So I'm marking all of these 2x4s to bring it over to the jointer to be able to just make these edges a little bit straighter, and I want to be able to also joint the top and the bottom to be able to make it where it's just as smooth as I possibly can. It's very important to have the pencil line on there, because once you run this through the jointer, you want to look at that edge, and if there's still a little bit of the pencil line there, you'll need to run it through one more time. By running the material through the jointer on the flat side, it also will remove a lot of the imperfections that occurred during the milling process at the actual mill. The next step is to line up all of the boards and move them around to be able to get the grain pattern to look as you want it to look. Now these are going to be joined together using biscuit joints. That's right, I'm going to use the biscuit joints to be able to put these together, and this is what the little biscuits look like. They're just compressed wood that when you put the glue on it and you have it in the slot in these different boards, they'll actually expand and make for a very good solid joint. I'm using this router with this old Craftsman attachment. This is probably one of the oldest biscuit cutting tools that you could possibly find, but it still works good and there's no reason to replace it. So this is what I'm going to be using to cut these slots. The way this works is you just take the router and put it right down on the surface of the material and then push it into the wood itself. And then you just slide the router left and right and it cuts these slots. These slots are actually cut all along both sides of the board to be able to have a matching set. And from there, when it's time to join them together, we're going to put in glue, lots of glue. And we're also going to put glue into those slots themselves. Then the little biscuits will get dropped right down into those slots. There's also a reference line on the 2x4s themselves to make sure that they're all aligned exactly as they should be. And with the numbers on there, it makes it very easy to be able to assemble this. Now it's time to add clamps. And I'm using clamps both on the top and the bottom to be able to help to keep it flat while the glue is drying. Now here's a very important step that you don't want to miss. You see I'm attaching a board right now, and that board actually helps to ensure that this top is completely flat. And you see in the foreground I already have attached this one at the other end. With that attached, it is going to be flat. Now you want to make sure that you put some tape on that edge, on that board, because if you do not, that will glue to the surface of the bench, and that would not make for a very good day. So I use a regular packing tape on that board and then attach it with the clamps, and that will ensure that this top is completely 100% flat. And as you tighten these clamps, that glue is going to squeeze out, and yes, you're going to have quite a bit of glue that squeezes out onto the surface. Well, it's the next morning, and it's time now to remove all of the clamps. Now, one of the things that I wanted to show you close up is this board. You notice how easy it comes off. This is the packing tape that I put onto the board that protects it, because the glue will not stick to that. As I flip over the top to the underside, I have a lot of the little drops of the glue that have dripped out, and that's okay. Again, you can take a putty knife and scrape off the majority of those very easily. I start the sanding process with the belt sander. Now this is 60 grit paper, and this does really well to be able to remove all of the glue and the pencil marks off of the surface of this. The next step is I'm going to switch over to the disc sander, and I'm going to be using the Starbond sanding disc, and again I'm going to start with the 60 grit paper. And I'm going to go through progressive steps from the 60 all the way up to the 220 to be able to give a really smooth surface on this bench top. So I'm going to grab the appropriate nozzle to be able to attach to the disc sander, and I'm going to start sanding. Again, I'm going from 60 grit up to 220 grit, and this is virtually dust free with the dust collection system in place. So after sanding this a few minutes and getting it really nice and smooth, you can see up close how this looks absolutely amazing. The joints in here are extremely tight, smooth, and this is what the type of surface that you're looking for. The only thing that's left now is to be able to fill these voids, and I'll do a final sanding. Now to be able to fill these voids, I'm going to be using the Starbond CA glue along with the sawdust from my dust collection system. It's the perfect complement to be able to fill all those holes. When I cut these boards initially, I cut them a little bit long. Remember, the total length needs to be 80 inches. So now it's time to be able to come through and cut off the little bit of excess to get the exact length that I need, which is the 80 inches. And to do that, I'm going to be using a circular saw to be able to make this cut. I'm using this very simple jig that I made a number of years ago. It's similar to a track saw, but this was made before track saws even existed. And literally all I do is just line up that edge to the pencil bark that I made for the cut line, clamp this down, and then I'll use the circular saw and make the cut. So what you're looking at is some very old technology. Long before they had track saws, this is what we used to be able to make these types of cuts. So there's no need to buy a track saw when this type of old school technology works so well. The next step is I want to show you how I made these shelf brackets. Very simple, very easy, and again some old school technology. So I use the socket to be able to get the small radius. I use a paint can to get the larger radius. And once I have the original one drawn, then you can just trace out the original one to duplicate it. So it begins to be a real easy process. As far as the sanding, of course I'm going to use the oscillating sander to be able to make quick work of the sanding process. To be able to do the small detail work and get into these little corners, I'll use this small little belt sander, and it does the job. The results I think are absolutely amazing. The design for this shelf bracket actually came from the photo. To cut the top shelf, I'm using this piece of material. That's the perfect width. I just need to cut off with these dowel pins because this is recycled from another project. I'll use the circular saw to cut this to the proper length, and then it's off to the planer to be able to make sure that it's perfectly flat. And again, you notice I use the pencil lines on there. Oh, and yes, you can't leave out the sanding. The final step for the shelf and for the bench itself is to be able to put this 45-degree bevel onto the edge. By using this 45-degree angle on here, it softens that sharp edge and it creates a very distinctive look. And as a side note, it does match the dining room table. And here's a close-up look at this 45-degree bit that I used in the trim router. At this point, all that's left to do is to stain the wood itself. And I'm using a Minwax Espresso stain to be able to do this. And it just wipes on, wipe off the excess, and then I'll set it aside in a separate room so that it'll dry. In the meantime, I'm going to start building the pedestals. Now the pedestal is going to be made out of a 1/2-inch plywood. They'll be, of course, 15.5 inches tall, making the overall bench 17 inches tall. Now as far as the depth, I'll make these 16 inches so that the bench itself will have a little bit of an overhang. The width of the pedestal itself is going to be 3 inches. So I also had to rip that material down, and now I'm just cutting those to length. To be able to create the rabbet joint, it's only 2 cuts. I lower the table saw blade down to where it's a little bit more than halfway cutting through the material. And as far as the fence is set up to be able to cut the width of the 1/2-inch plywood. And then from there, I'll just make the cut. Now this is a very safe cut because the blade does not come through the material at all. To make the second cut of this rabbet cut, I just need to adjust the fence and the height to be able to correspond to that first cut. Again, this is a very safe cut to make because you're only exposing a very, very small amount of the blade and your hands are far away from the blade itself. Here's a look at the close-up view of the rabbet joint on this front edge of the material. Now this is the perfect width to be able to receive that 1/2-inch plywood. The last piece of wood that I need is the back of the pedestal itself, and that's going to be 2 inches wide. Now I'm using some scrap material to be able to get my 2-inch material that I need for that back. Now here's a close-up look of the front of the pedestal, all assembled with the glue and the nails. And then I'm going to turn it around so that you can see the rear of it. And this will show the 2-inch strip that I put in. Now this is not cut all the way to the top. And there's a reason for that, because there will need to be a cleat that will be put onto the bench itself and stabilize the pedestal to the bench. The next piece of plywood that I need to cut is the part that actually goes on the wall, from the bench to the shelf above. Now I'm using a 1/4-inch piece of the plywood to be able to cut this to the proper length. Once this is done, all my cuts will be done and I'm ready to paint. I'm putting 2 coats of paint on everything and of course sanding in between. I'm using a roller to be able to put the paint on because it actually goes much quicker and it avoids having all the brush strokes. This creates a very smooth finish and is perfect for what I want for this project. To seal the bench and the shelf itself, I'm using a water-based polyurethane finish. Now this is a satin finish that it will complement what's already in the home. And again, I'm going to put 2 coats on this and I will sand in between. You can see the shelf on the background and it looks absolutely amazing. There's no brush marks, perfectly smooth, and I love the satin finish. I'm starting out the installation with the pedestals themselves. I have them laid out roughly to where they need to go. I'm using a baseboard as a spacer. So I'm going to put in this small piece to begin with, and the first pedestal is already nailed in right against the wall. I have the other baseboard pieces already cut, and they're cut at 16 inches. This also makes it where there's no additional measurements needed. I have the baseboard, I'll just slide in against the first pedestal and nail it in position. Then I'll take the next pedestal and slide it over and put it up right against the baseboard itself, and then just add in the next piece of baseboard. And I'll continue this process for all 5 of these pedestals. To secure the pedestal to the wall, I'll use the level just to make sure that they're plumb, and then I'll put a screw directly into the top of the pedestal, and that will hold it firmly in position. Again, I'll repeat this process for all 5 of the pedestals. I also added a 1/4 round to the bottom of the base, and in the original drawing there was 1/4 round around the pedestals, but last minute change and they said nope, don't want the 1/4 round around the pedestals. It's time to add the bench top, and to do that I need to be able to also add the cleats that will go onto the bench top itself and down into those pedestals. And that does two things. It will stabilize the pedestal and it will also secure the bench top. I want to be able to have a nice straight plumb line to be able to use as a reference, and I'm using a white pencil to be able to make that mark onto the bench top. Then I'll just nail on the cleat using that white line as my reference point. The cleats themselves are a critical component because it stabilizes the front of the pedestal and it also stabilizes the bench top itself so it will not move. I added a second piece of this 3/4 inch plywood to this cleat just to make it a little bit easier to be able to nail the front edge of the pedestal into that cleat. Now it's time just to lower the bench top right down on top of the pedestals, and those cleats hold perfectly. Now I'm going to take the nail gun and just shoot a nail into the front of the pedestal into that cleat. So the first step is done, and some may want to stop right here. But for me, the next step is to add this 1/4 inch piece of the plywood that's already cut to length, already painted. All I need to do is just set it up here against a wall and nail it in position. Next, I want to add these 1x4 trim pieces. And again, these are already painted and they're ready to be installed. Next, I'm installing the vertical pieces. And I'm going to install all 5 of these vertical pieces. The left side and the right side need no measurements at all. This left piece goes right against the wall itself, and the one on the right will go right against the edge. As far as the other 3 remaining pieces, they're going to be spaces 16 inches apart. That will give the perfect alignment exactly to match the pedestals below. I'll mark a plumb line just as a reference to be able to make sure that these pieces are installed vertically. And then I can just simply nail them in position using that plumb line as my reference point, and I know now that that will be perfectly in line with the pedestal below. The top piece of the trim actually holds the shelf bracket. Now these shelf brackets are very important to be able to hold the weight of that shelf. And I want to be able to attach these without putting big old screws through the shelf bracket and be visible. So these are going to be lined up, again, exactly in line with the pedestal and with the vertical pieces of the trim. To attach them, I'm going to flip this piece over and screw it in from the back side. That way there'll be no visible signs of the screws showing on the front. I temporarily attached these brackets with CA glue so that when I flip this trim piece over, those shelf brackets didn't fall on the floor. So this worked out real well to be able to flip it over and attach the screws to be able to hold the shelf bracket on. Now it's time to install this top trim piece. I'll temporarily hold it with nails, and then I'll put screws in every 16 inches across the top. To be able to install these coat hooks, I used a blue tape so that I can use the pencil lines and mark out exactly where I want it. So those are my layout lines on the blue tape. And then as I install each of the coat hooks, I can remove the painter's tape and there's no marks left on this finished paint job. What a great transformation of this entryway. It turned an unusable wall into a very functional space. Hey, thanks a lot for watching this video, and if you like content like this, check out this video right up here to be able to see more home improvement and furniture build. So please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget, subscribe right down below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So bye-bye, everyone.